So in the world of, here in the United States, of spiritual care, the field of spiritual care, pastoral care or chaplaincy care, there was a theologian named Henry Nouwen who was kind of foundational for establishing kind of the general field of, or the ethos, the understanding of spiritual care in hospitals and chaplaincy and things like that. And he had there's a very famous quote or teaching from him, which I don't remember exactly how it is, but it goes something like this, that to offer spiritual care is to create an empty space in which to welcome the stranger. This works particularly well like in chaplaincy, where you're meeting people you don't know. A chaplain is meeting people they don't know. But to create the empty space in which to welcome the stranger. And so what is this empty space that we create? And I think it's easier to point out the opposite that we create. We fill the space with our opinions, with our assertiveness, where even sometimes there's no space for people if we try too much to take care of them, if we're taking the initiative and working on them. And we fill the space with our judgments. We fill the space with our conceit, like I'm special, I'm going to be the spiritual caregiver, or I'm this and that, or sometimes it's negative definitions of ourselves we have. And so kind of people can feel that we're so, the emotions and the ideas that we're kind of living under, that there's no space for the other. And in offering spiritual care, if that's the purpose, it's to kind of clear the air so people can breathe, so people can be themselves, so people can feel like it's okay to be themselves. And they're not being judged or put into a box. And so to recognize that this person's welcomed here as they are, completely as they are. And that's so important for this kind of spiritual care, because that's the foundation, that kind of acceptance is the foundation to let someone blossom, to let someone find themselves, let someone grow and develop and kind of become even more who they actually are in some way. So but we also can do this to ourselves. We can create an empty space in which to welcome ourselves, a kind space in which to welcome ourselves. And what do we do that gets in the way of that? One of the ways is that we define ourselves in a lot of ways. And that way in which we kind of fill the space with definitions of ourselves is one of the things that meditation can help clear out. And there are other ways that humans can find ways to clear out the space for themselves, clear out all the definitions that we're operating under. Sometimes, here locally, someone might go down to the coast and walk along the shore, the sand. It's such a big open expanse sometimes, and that can be a place where so much falls away and is forgotten away from society. And there's a kind of space there, just be and not be defined. Somehow the magnitude, the magnificence of the great Pacific Ocean and the sky and the size of it, and can just kind of give a very different perspective of who we are, whereas in an urban environment, it's so easy to be defined by our job, our relationships, our traffic patterns, all kinds of things. But sometimes in the night sky and looking at a clear, dark sky where all the stars are shining, a kind of very different kind of feeling for who we are that maybe creates a kind of empty space where we're not defined. And so meditation can be one of those places where, and it's actually an important function or opportunity of meditation, is to discover how to be present, how to breathe, be attentive, with a kind of empty space for ourselves without definition. This is represented a little bit, I think, or very powerfully, by how the Buddha referred to himself. We call him the Buddha. We keep saying Buddha, Buddha, Buddha. He wasn't called Buddha as often in his time when he was alive, as much as we're calling him that these days. We've kind of settled on this as his name, but it's really a epithet. It's not really a given name. It means the awakened one. And there were people who called him that. He seldom called himself that. Many people called him by his given name, Gautama. And but how he referred to himself was he used this very enigmatic phrase that was maybe not original to him. It might have been already a title for spiritual teachers in his time. And the word in Pali is tatagata. And tatagata is made up of this word tata, which is a very simple word that means like this, or thus, or so. And the gata part is, lots of people have written about what this word gata is, but we find it used repeatedly as a suffix that just means something like the one, the thing. So the thing that is, the one that is so, the one who is like this. And imagine if you go to someone and you say like, what are you and who are you? And they say, oh, I'm like this. You get what you see, kind of. I'm like this. Maybe they don't even say anything to you. They just open their arms and it's like, here I am, They don't define themselves. It could be a little bit irritating. But there's also something very profound about that, where the kind of the way, the self way of seeing and holding oneself is in this empty space where everything's allowed to be there, is welcomed. But there's an idea, let's not define it in any one particular way. Any one particular way of definition narrows the field. It doesn't allow for the fullness of what a person is. It doesn't allow for the fullness of what a person can grow into in the next minute, in the next moment. And so to not be defined. The Buddha did define himself at times, and he recognized that it's appropriate to define. It's a little bit ringing. Is it ringing a little bit? Maybe it's a little bit too loud. Let's see, is that better now? You're always welcome to say something if the sound is not good. So the Buddha did, say there's a time and place to define people, and he wanted to define people by what they do. So if you're farming, then you're a farmer, he said. If you're selling goods, you're a merchant. If you're a ruler, if you're ruling people, then you're a ruler. If you're a thief, he says, if you steal, then you're a thief. But it's very clearly, this is provisional. These are just conventions. These are just ways of referring to people by what they're doing that just helps us organize our life in an efficient way. I mean, imagine if you go to a hospital, say you have a big illness, maybe big surgery is needed, brain surgery, and you really want to be cared about. But that particular day you go to the hospital, they decided, defining everyone in the hospital by what they do, that's old hat, and it limits everyone too much. Today in the hospital, everyone who works there is not going to have any definition. No one's going to be recognized as a surgeon, or as a janitor, or as an administrative person. We're just there working. And so then, we need someone to come and do surgery. Everyone shows up. The whole hospital thing works so much more efficiently if people kind of are known by their function and what they've been trained to do. But when they leave the hospital and they take off maybe their uniform, and then they don't have to be defined that way anymore. Some people want to continue to be defined that way outside of their work. They're holding on to it, their status, their power, their all kinds of things come with certain roles, and so people will hold on, want to say, you better define me this way. Let me tell you who I am, outside of the context of what they're doing. And like for me, I spent a lot of time teaching. But there was a time where, when I was a beginning teacher, I would go home to my wife, and she said to me, Gil, you're using that voice again. So, that's the place I can't be a teacher, right? At home. So there's places where you better drop it, put it aside. And so this ability to be defined while we're doing something and drop it when we're not doing it. The ability to be defined functionally in the right place by what we're doing in certain situations, but to also have the ability to create for ourselves an empty space where, of course, you're allowed to be who you are, but maybe there is no are. Maybe there is no thing that you are in terms of fixed, static thing. In Buddhism, the idea is that who we are is what we're becoming. It's always dynamic. It's always changing. We're in a constant state of becoming and renewing and developing and growing and transforming and changing. Buddhism has this very dynamic view of what a human being is. And so because of that, the idea of a fixed definition limits the open space in which we can grow into the next moment, the next moment, the next moment. So we come to meditation, and part of what's possible in meditation is to let go of all the definitions. Let go of all the judgments. Let go of it all. Sometimes, for some people, it might be easier to do for the external definitions in meditation, maybe, that, the profession we have, for example, or the place we have in a family. It was kind of eye-opening for me when I was in my 20s, and I was talking to a Zen teacher about my relationship to my father. And the Zen teacher said to me, your father, there was a time when your father was not a father. It was just a person. And chances are, once you grow, once you've kind of really left home, I had already left home, but I guess I hadn't. He has a life outside of being a father. And I said, really? I was like, oh, I just thought that's who he was. He's the father. And suddenly he became much more multidimensional, and I kind of created space for my father to be something beyond just a father. So it might be some meditation is a place where the external definitions, how we are in society, maybe can drop away, maybe a little bit easier sometimes than how we do it for ourselves on the inside, how we've internalized these things. And not a few people will define themselves by their shortcomings, will define themselves by negative judgments. I'm too this, I'm too that. For me, when I was young, in my 20s, I had a wonderful, amazing capacity to feel guilty. And I was just guilty if I breathed somehow, just like no matter what, I was, before I did something, I was guilty. Before I even knew I was going to do something, I was guilty. And, excuse me. And it was only when I started doing my meditation practice, my Zen practice, I saw how pervasive it was. The first time I saw it was, I was walking across the meditation hall floor, and I felt guilty in the way I was walking. And I said, what? What's going on here? And so we might think that we're somehow inadequate, or we're not worthy. We've sometimes feel that way because we've internalized judgments from society. And our societies do terrible things to each other, judging each other by their race and their gender and their sexual orientation and their class status and all kinds of things that we do, size and age, and then sometimes people internalize it. And so they go around feeling that somehow, they're not unlimited. They're not filled with huge, unlimited potential to become something in an inner way, but rather they're held limited by these judgments, these ideas, these concepts that we're caught in. And so the amazing thing that's possible in meditation is to not just calm down. Meditation is often associated with becoming calm, but calmness is just a kind of tip of the iceberg of what can happen as the mind gets stiller and quieter. And one of the things that can happen is that the activity of the mind to judge, the activity of the mind to define, takes a break, takes a vacation. And we come to a time when we feel ourselves, we experience ourselves without any definition. So that like the Buddha, at those moments, if someone said, "Who are you? What are you?" it would be a sincere answer to just go like, lift your arms out, wide, and spread them wide, and just like to hear it, just in the gesture imply just this. Or maybe you say, someone says, "Who are you? What are you?" "I'm this." No definition beyond that. And they have to just kind of somehow deal with that or take that in. But that seems sincere. Anything else seems like it maybe limits it or narrows it. So to come to a place where the sincere answer is this is who I am. Sincere place is we've created an empty space in which to welcome ourselves. Empty space to allow whatever we're kind of meant to be, or whatever the conditions come together to move through us and wants to grow and develop and express itself, that we kind of begin creating space for seeing that and discovering it. One of the advantages of doing this, at this empty space, this non-definition, is we can see much more clearly when we begin defining ourselves. We can see more clearly when we begin acting and becoming something. And if in fact what you're becoming is the hateful one, the one who hates, the hater, you can see that clearly. And in that clarity, where you haven't been judging yourself, you haven't been criticizing yourself or feeling guilty, you continue to not criticize yourself, you continue not feeling guilty, but you recognize, for example, the hate that arises, and you recognize this is not good, this is not useful, this limits me, this really limits me. In fact, the Buddha said that very clearly. He said, greed, hate, and delusion are limiters. They limit people. They kind of, and so we can feel the cost of having hate in a way that we can't if we're living an active, stressed, racing around life. And we don't even, it just feels like hate can just feel like it's on automatic pilot. And people don't realize that they were hating until after they're arrested for road rage, because they were so beside themselves and what they've caught up in. This ability to come into some modicum of an empty space where we can welcome all of who we are can help us be much more responsible for what we are and what arises within us without judgment, without criticism. And we can learn to recognize when what's coming through us is healthy and not a problem, and when it has motivated by unhealthy things like greed and lust or conceit or hate. This is a hugely powerful insight to have, and to see that and then to work with it and practice with it and maybe return to the empty space. Because the empty space that welcomes a stranger is a kind space. is a place of kindness, a place that allows for the heart's care to be there. It's a caring place. Remember, the Henry Nouwen's quote was a quote for people who are caregivers, spiritual caregivers. That's a space they're creating for their care. So to have that care for ourselves, have this care for others, by discovering how to breathe, be alive, be attentive without definition. Maybe in a way that can be a bit like a very, very clean glass. Have you ever gone up to a glass door and tried to walk through it without realizing it was glass? I've done that. It's just so clean and clear, I don't see it. But if the glass is defined, like we have here for the birds, a decal on the door, that defines it's a door for the birds, so they know. But or the window is dirty, or tinted, or whatever. It defines. But when it's really clear, then it kind of has no definition. So the mind can become like a clear window, or even better, an open window. So to sit, meditate, and to see what our mind is doing without judgment, to see what our mind is doing, dedicated to create an open, welcoming space for all of it, can allow the warm, open space, can allow the tension to unwind, can allow the stress that's behind so much of our everyday behavior to settle and quiet. And the stress behind defining ourselves, the stress behind being caught in self-definitions and self-judgments, has a chance to relax and relax and relax. And so you can follow the path of that relaxation. Follow the path to less and less being defined by anything, until you find that the absence of definition provides a freedom and a capacity to welcome everyone in a friendly space. So those are my thoughts today. So do you have any thoughts? Anybody have any comments or questions? But if you could use the mic, Camille's going to give it to you.
Thank you. Hi, thank you
And
for that.
a little bit louder, please.
Oh, sorry.
From your mic, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Just what you're talking about is what I'm really working with right now, and I'm really realizing how much I hate. And I think a lot of it comes from, obviously, projection of self-hatred, but also just using like trusting my own inner guidance as far as where my hate goes. Like sometimes, I knew someone who was a Buddhist teacher who hit her dog, things like that. And I had so much hate. I just, anyone who hurts an animal, it just fills me with rage. And so I don't even really know where I'm going with this, but I guess I have a lot of confusion sometimes about like what to accept, what to reject, and my own inner guidance, but knowing that I also just don't have it all figured out. So I feel like things are really tight at the same time, but also really spacious. And I don't know, it feels really groundless right now. And it's scary.
Yeah, well, I certainly appreciate the clarity in which you can talk about this hate that you have and rage. Yeah. I mean, that's quite phenomenal to have that kind of clarity and to be able to have the willingness to say it publicly like this. I take this to be really healthy, what you just did. So I think you're on a good path. And the fact that you're kind of feeling groundless at this particular juncture, probably there's no way around that. I think it is a groundless time to kind of come to terms with it, to deal with it, see it so clearly. And the fact that you can hold both some kind of more spacious way and the struggle with this hate and rage, I think you're probably in good hands with yourself. Okay. And I think probably just continue, because the hate that you're feeling, the rage you're feeling, it probably needs that friendly, welcoming space. It's probably it's probably a symptom of something deeper.
Yeah.
And so don't feed the hate, but make room for it. Befriend it so it has space and time, and because it might begin to settle enough that you can feel what's actually underneath it. And I don't want to limit you what it might be, but just to give you a hint.
Thank you.
I think a high percentage of people who have hate and rage, somewhere underneath it there's a deep sense of hurt. And so eventually it's the hurt that really needs your attention and care. And to be sidetracked too much by believing the hate or acting on the hate is actually a disservice to what really needs the attention.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello. Can you hear me? Yes?
I think
Okay.
so.
Thank you for what you shared today. Your teaching resonated for me, not only in what I'm working on right now, but in relation to a kind of tangential idea which might be relatable for others, which is one of the things I discover when I'm meditating, in that when I'm in the open space, when all has fallen away and I'm in the stillness, is that is where there's space not only to let go of defining, but to let go of self-judgment, to work with my thought life, to be able to notice that I am believing my thoughts, and to then choose to not only allow, starting with the allowance, and then for me, there's prayer involved as well. So in connecting to source and opening. And in that, I'm creating space. And I'm deeply grateful that you put some words to what happens there.
Very nice.
Thank you.
And very nice. And just to add something to what you said, is that as you're doing what you're doing, making that space, seeing your thoughts and what you believe, it's probably a process of continuing ability to open more space, new dimensions of more space. And then you see more and more deeply what some of the thought patterns are and which ones are healthy and which are not. Yes.
Thank you, Gil, for today's talk. So continuing on some of the points that have been raised, I just wanted to ask if you mentioned we need to create an open space where we don't have judgments. But often we come with judgments and it's tight and restricted. So is the path of going from that tight and restricted space to open, non-judging, is it basically acknowledging what's coming and giving space for what's coming? And is that the path by which it happens, or does it happen through developing, a meditation practice?
It's a great question. And so hopefully my response will address it. One of the really important abilities we have as human beings that maybe is underappreciated is the capacity to have the veto over what we do. To say, I'm not going to say that, I'm not going to do that. We don't necessarily have control over what the mind kicks up. The thoughts, the motivations, what we feel like we want to say, what we want to do. That is maybe outside of our control to always, and that's why it's good not to be able to judge ourselves for what comes, because it's not necessarily in our control what comes. But we do have, and that's what we want to have as a minimum in Buddhist practice, we want to have the ability to have the veto power. And so, okay, I'm not going to say that. And I'm not going to act on that. And so learning to be restrained, to be at peace, to be at ease in not doing is a phenomenal capacity. It doesn't sound very exciting to be restrained, right? I mean, come to IMC and learn how to be restrained. I mean, no one's going to come. It just feels like, that's too restrained, that's too limited, that's too something. But it's actually the opposite. that as we learn not to act on the unhealthy motivations, unhealthy, harmful things that mind is capable of doing, or not, or if we're unsure whether it's healthy or harmful, to maybe hold back, we actually then get closer to that place of being undefined, being unlimited, and being free. We're actually exercising our freedom in doing the veto power. Does that address your concern?
Yes, thank you. So what you're saying is keep doing the vetoing until you go from a constricted space into an open space in the mind. And eventually it develops all the time, like not just during meditation.
Yeah, especially if you're in social work. So, there are times, of course, where you want to kind of give free rein to what's going on in the mind. And sometimes meditation is that place. When I used to go to the gym, I worked in exercise machines. That was a time I gave free rein to my mind. And I would sometimes close my eyes doing some of the exercises and just let complete freedom to let the mind do whatever it wanted to do. Or if I go for a walk up in the hills here, there have been times when I've been really angry, and I go for a walk. I'm not going to do anything to anyone. I'm not going to say anything or do anything, but I'm going to go walk fast up in the hills and let it just kind of course through me. So I'm not I'm not suppressing anything. I'm not repressing anything. It's very important to see it clearly. But what the veto power is over is causing harm with it.
Thank you, Gil.
Thank you. Good morning, and thanks very much for the talk, Gil. So I've become aware that sometimes, kind of building on what you were just saying, that I can either have a response to someone that seems unkind, or even an immature reaction. So it just strikes me that it's almost like I have a bunch of 3-year-olds and 7-year-olds within me.
Yes.
And I've kind of got to say, no kids, we're not going to do that, right?
Yeah.
But sometimes it comes out and you do it, but
sometimes
hopefully
you need to,
much of the time you're able to.
Sometimes you need to call on the inner adult.
Yes, exactly.
Or the inner grandparent, if you have good references for that.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have all these capacities. We can't necessarily control whether those inner kids are doing, having a party, but you do have the veto power about what spills out.
And hopefully by nurturing them over time, we can help them maybe grow up a little bit.
Yes, I think very much so. Very, very much so. Yes. Is there a mic over there?
I can bring it over.
Where's the other mic? Oh, you have it there. Okay.
Hi, good morning. I think going back to, having that veto power is a way to have inner love for yourself, but then also external love for those that you're talking to, having that respect. And so I'm glad you brought that up because I think that's very important. It's something that I think a lot of people miss these days because they just care about, I have an opinion, but it's not more of, well, maybe what I'm saying is going to be hurtful to that particular person.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you brought up the space about not only making space for a stranger, but making space for yourself, because I think a lot of us just forget that who we were and kind of comparing that to who we've become. And I think that's something that gets lost in some sort of translation as we're growing older and older and older. We forget that, hey, I'm so busy with my external life that I forget that I need to, take a step back and go, who was I before? And what am I missing? And I think that's something that a lot of people can, take advantage of. By the way, off topic, you have a great aura. I'm seeing that in you. But yeah, I think it's important for people to be kind to each other.
Yeah.
Overall.
Great. Yeah, thank you. That was really well said. Thank you very much. And so I think it just reinforces again, it says it a different way, how important meditation can be.
Thank you for the talk. I was thinking when you were talking about how the Buddha defined people by their jobs, merchant, teacher, doctor, and so forth. And then you spoke personally about your teaching voice when you got home and were with your wife. So I was thinking about fixed views, and that's one thing that makes us suffer. Fixed view of oneself. If I'm this, I need to behave and respond in a particular way. So you hinted at it, but I wonder if you could speak to how having this fixed view of self, doctor, teacher, lawyer, brilliant physician, can really be something that we cling to and cause some difficulty in our lives, more suffering.
Yeah. Well, if one is a little bit, what I go back to what you said, I think if it's too crowded with too many definitions and activities, there's no space for love. There's no space for kindness. There's no space for inquiry. There's no space for deeper self-discovery. But if we cling to like these roles, these jobs and stuff, it can be a headache for the people around you. You know, because you're expecting them to participate in the idea. You better treat me that, I'm like, you better treat me with the right respect because, guess who I am, and I'm this way. And
yeah, and I noticed for myself, I was a teacher for a number of years, and defining myself or thinking I was teacher was a heavy load to carry. So it's much more liberating and freeing psychologically to say, oh, I'm just who I am, or I am I am what you see, basically, rather than having to put on the role of a teacher all the time. So that was a weight that I somehow got rid of at some point, but it can be a pretty heavy burden for people.
there are people who would prefer that when they meet strangers, that the strangers don't ask them, what do you do? First, right away, because somehow that immediately defines them too much. They don't want to be defined so quickly by what they do. And other people love it. And then in between, it's just sometimes a very, very nice way to connect. So how do you know where in that spectrum it is? It depends on the context of the person. So I think we should stop. And but if you want to come out in the parking lot now, I think it's warm enough. Bring a folding chair with you, and we can sit in a circle, take off masks, and outside, and continue the discussion. We often do this on Sundays, so everyone's welcome to stay. And thank you for being here today, and thank you for your great comments and questions.